Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Transection podcast. In 2021, at the beginning of it anyway, we've got 4 more episodes to bring to you. And today we are talking to non-binary chaplain Tori Jameson, also known on TikTok as, I think it's @salty chaplain. And what they know about scripture and all of that sort of thing is really fascinating. We had a really good conversation. Tori is amazing because they're not just all about talking about theology and religion and things, but I would say that Tori is very much an active Christian and really serves people in the way, they're not just all talk, they're very actively in service to other people, regardless of their religion or whatever. And just an amazing person. And I initially got in contact with Tori because I saw that another Facebook friend had got married to their partner just as they were scared that the law in their state was going to change. So there was kind of a mass sort of queer wedding thing on one particular day in their city of St. Louis, and I think it made national press, that particular wedding. And I thought, oh, Tori's someone I've really got to speak to. And it's been fascinating. I've learned so much, and I'm not religious myself, but I think sometimes you meet somebody who I feel is really practicing love in a big way and really kind of doing it right. And those people always leave a really big impression on me. And like when I spoke to Mark Silver in season 1, I think it was episode, I want to say 10 or 11. And Mark is a Sufi Muslim and comes from a Jewish background. And he's another person who really walks his talk and actually doesn't, does a lot more action than talking about it. And someone, so I think both of these people, I just find them amazing and really inspirational, very positive, and really living their principles in such a positive way. So I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't already, why have you not followed us on social media? We're on Instagram @Transection Podcast, Twitter @Transection P, and Facebook the Transection Podcast. Go and join us there. Reach out, send in any questions or anything else that you want. And if this new year you've realised that you need to do a bit of brushing up on your skills around supporting trans and non-binary people, if you haven't heard already, I've got my free guide. There's no catch. It's on my website at muxharrishill.com/PDF, and it's a guide for beginners if you're new to non-binary and trans stuff, or even if you're not particularly new but you haven't had any kind of condensed learning and you've just done what I did for years of picking things up along the way, like little pieces of information here and there all over the internet. This is I've had lots of really good reviews, and we're getting on for 200 downloads now, and it's helped so many people, and I want it to continue to help people. So go and grab a copy. You can take it into school or work, or even if it's just for yourself and your family. Maybe you're supporting somebody, and maybe you don't need to brush up yourself, but maybe where you work or your kids' school or something like that, maybe they need a bit of help and a bit more information. So it's there and it's free. And on the very same page you've also got a masterclass, an hour long, that walks you through the whole thing and really brings it to life. Both of these things are free because I really want to make sure that people are supported and have access to the knowledge that they need, because this is about people's well-being and their survival and hopefully thriving too, not just surviving. So yeah, go and have a look at that. Anyway, enjoy this episode. So welcome back to this episode of the Transection podcast. And today I'm joined by Tori. Hi, Tori. Thanks for coming on.
Hello. So nice to get to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm super excited to talk with you, Tori. For our listeners, Tori is a non-binary and queer chaplain in what state are you in the US?
Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri.
Missouri. And as far as progressive states go, where would you pitch Missouri in the state?
So we're in the smack middle of the United States. And Missouri is a deeply red, meaning like deeply conservative state. I live in a very blue city. So meaning that we are a progressive city in surrounded by very, very conservative political and religious culture.
Right. So is that a bit weird?
I have lived in places that are like this, progressive cities in conservative areas, for quite a long time. So I know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little bit weird because, like, especially as a queer person, there are protections that we have in Missouri or like in St. Louis that we don't have outside of Missouri or out in the rest of Missouri. And so like, I can, in the city of St. Louis, I am protected if I work like a regular, 9 to 5 job or whatever. I am protected from being fired for being gay or trans. Like they can't look at me and say, hey, I found out you have a same gender partner, or hey, I found out you're transitioning or whatever. So we don't hire your kind, you have to leave. Like, they can still run you out for other reasons that are probably related to those things, right? But they can't formally say that in the city of St. Louis because we have protections, but the rest of Missouri, you can. So cool. There's a Supreme Court case that's a little questionable on perhaps maybe like some of that has to be a little bit less explicit, but yeah, technically in the state of Missouri, you can be fired for being gay. Like literally just one day be like, oh, Harris, I figured out your secret. Out, it's wild. You also don't have protections for like if you have a same gender partner, right? Or that if I it's COVID, so everything's weird right now. But like in the city of St. Louis, my partner can come to the hospital, and my, but like, I can designate whoever I want. But in like the rest of Missouri, most of our hospitals are religiously affiliated, and they may deny me that. Now I can fight them like hell, but it's within their rights to say we don't serve LGBTQ people. Your partner can't make those decisions for you. So like lots and lots of that sort of things, adoptions, and there just aren't rights in the rest of Missouri. So it's queer people tend to live in St. Louis or in Kansas City, where there's a lot of the same rights, or kind of Columbia, which so with Kansas City is on the other side of the state. Columbia is sort of in the middle. Those places all voted for, Joe Biden overwhelmingly. The rest of the state did not. And so our state as a whole went to Trump.
Wow. Well, that's a lot there. How do you navigate sort of bumping into or having to interact with people who are so against sort of you just being yourself or your values? Like how do you manage that?
I mean, in a liberal city, like I don't know how it is where you're at, but I'd be curious to know like what it's like to go to the grocery store, or kind of like if you get on the bus to go across the city or whatever, interacting. Again, COVID is weird, so I know all that is limited everywhere, but in more normal times, like even living in a liberal city, I can't guarantee that I am safe, right? That I'm going to be treated with respect or dignity because I'm visibly queer, right? I have short hair. I'm non-binary in a lot of ways. I am, visibly androgynous a lot of times, right? You know, and so as a visibly queer person, and then especially if I'm dressed in my pastoral gear, right, my priest collar, like you know, and or bedecked with rainbows or trans colors, or a lot of that I'm intentionally wearing, like I, you know, even if I'm just dressed in the most street clothes that I've got, um I'm still visibly queer, and so I don't necessarily expect to be respected. You know, I'm sort of constantly on guard with having to know that, like, I can get yelled at in the store, we can be treated badly. You know, even in the cities where we live now, the store, like in the rest of Missouri, you can be denied service, right? From a restaurant. You know, if you're a same gender couple. Now, they don't usually, right? Because if you do that, like, boy, the AC, you know, like, boy, one of our civil rights organizations would love to take that case. But, like, in theory, you can be, and so they can just kind of be nasty to you, with impunity. I think, like, navigating that, like, because the whole world, I guess for me, feels a little unsafe.
Mm.
You sort of, for me, I think I kind of create a bubble, right? And I try to live inside that bubble as much as possible.
Mm.
um I live in a very queer neighborhood, um but also, like, I think that there's something really beautiful about being visibly queer in a place where that scene is really strange. um because and as clergy, right, I'm a clergy person, and so, like, being seen as, like, in this role, like, you're this possibility model, right, like, you're able to, like, I'm able to, like, you know, look, queer people can have relationships, queer people can have families, queer people can go to the grocery store, you know, like, we're just like you, we like ice cream, you know, we choose ice cream over asparagus, you know, like, when we're looking at our grocery budgets, right, though we shouldn't, etc., you know. So I don't know if that
Mm.
answers that question, but
Yeah, yeah. I think there's something really important about finding community and making sure that your world is at least in part reflecting you, right? I think
right,
that you can end up feeling so isolated and maybe even alienated if most of the people and the stories, the movies, you know, most of what you're taking in is not you. And I think
right,
there's definitely power in that. And actually, I advised a coaching client recently. We were looking at sort of what they wanted in their life and how things had been in recent years, and how that was actually completely unaligned to who they really were and how they really needed to be. And I said, one of the things you need to do regularly is maybe watch some really like queer programs or movies, or, you know, just start making your world more like you and your environment. And I always think it's amazing how many of us can forget that, or not not be in the habit of, you know, making our world kind of work for us or representative of us. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think that if you can do that in most situations, that can really have such a positive effect, even if,
right,
you know, you're sort of in a on a queer island in a sea of red
right.
MAGA Trump, you know, supporters.
And
So
so, like, here I've really worked to create really chosen family, right? And to, you know, like, really build a community, yeah, that works for me but also works for other folks. Like, I think that it's, so the organization that I run is called Lot's Wife Trans and Queer Chaplaincy. um and we serve trans folks and some of our sex positive communities, so kinksters and leather folks and polyamorous folks and all that. Basically serving folks in our community who are literally not served by any other organization offering spiritual and emotional support. Most of my folks are non-religious, although increasingly I have a whole bunch of young witchy queers, right? We're doing an event I'm sure I'll talk about later, but like currently half the folks signed up for this Adopt a Queer event like thing are Yule celebrators, so we might have to hold like a super trans, like trans as all as possible Yule celebration on Zoom, right? Because it looks like that's what's needed by my folks. But anyway, I think that like in doing the community work, like one of the most important things that I can be doing in serving this chaplaincy role to our community is helping to foster connections between folks, you know, and building community. And because like we like the world is shitty. Like COVID is shitty. Trump is shitty and he might not leave. Like even if he leaves, like my governor doesn't believe in masks and science denial. Like I don't know what's going to happen with vaccines. Capitalism sucks. Like it sucks that like we don't give healthcare to people. Like the only way you can get healthcare is if you work a certain level of job with like over 40 hours a week. Like your value is determined by the amount of money that you can earn and not, you know, and like that cuts out so many of our folks, especially like trans community is historically unemployed and underemployed. You know, like there's just you know, there's so much bigotry and hatred, and we're dealing with like extremely racist police, you know, here in the city. Like there's just all of these sort of kind of churning issues, right? The big society issues, the local issues, and like and community is sort of an antidote to that. Like capitalism doesn't work for us. Capitalism doesn't work for people who look and live like me, but we can create a community that we can provide, you know, we can work on mutual aid and help care for each other, right? Like capitalism doesn't work for us, so let's share what we have, because we're only going to survive if we survive together.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really important. And so like it's not actually about me, but it's about, you know, like we need this like very trans island in order for like our trans folks to have a chance at surviving. But also like we take in so many rural queers, right? Like, you know, like people come out in the middle of Missouri and are like, hey, and I'm not safe, I'm gonna go to St. Louis. And so, you know, we also like are constantly bringing in people, you know, and like, and so it's this beautiful situation, but where there's always like so much need, you know. And so creating a community that can support that need and kind of spurn each other toward, you know, getting what we need, but really toward our collective liberation is incredibly important.
Yeah, definitely. That's really beautifully put. So, Tori, your organisation is called Lot's Wife. Tell us about sort of from a biblical perspective about Lot's wife and why that name she was chosen as the figurehead.
Yeah. So, okay. So Sodom and Gomorrah is probably a story that's of course familiar to you coming from a church background, but probably familiar like if you know anything about, you know, cultural Christianity. Judaism I think is less obsessed with this story, but like, you know, conservative cultural Christianity, you've probably heard something about it. But essentially there's these two cities, and they're kind of like in the middle of like the desert. You know, they don't have like Google Earth, you know, they don't have interstates, right? Like for all intents and purposes, for the people that live in these places, they're basically it. Like those two cities are all of the people in the world, which is important into the later interpretation of it. So anyway, so Sodom and Gomorrah there, and there is terrible things happening in the city. You know, there's evil being done, and but the big sin, according to the text, the big sin that's happening is that there's a lack of hospitality. And so God like sends these two like men or angels, depending on how you read that word in the Hebrew. But so anyway, sends these two angels to go and basically test, like, are they really going to continue to be inhospitable to the stranger? This is like the biggest thing that they have to, they're terrible. They're being terrible to each other, doing all these evils, including this particular thing. Okay, so anyways, these two strangers show up. They're not given hospitality. In fact, except by one righteous family, the family of Lot. And so they take in these strangers, and people are so upset that people have, broken the societal norm, right? You've let in the outsider, and that was core to the way the society was set up. But they've broken this, societal norm, and welcomed a stranger as God had commanded. And that they surround Lot's house. They bang on the doors. They demand that these men be given over to them so that they can hurt them. Or angels, whatever they are, right? But they demand that they be given over. Lot, in a not great twist, Lot says, no, you can't have these strangers, but here, have my daughters, which is awkward. They don't want the daughters. The daughters didn't do anything wrong. They want to attack these men, right? They want these strangers out, right? They want to boot out the strangers. And so, and because of this wickedness, Lot and his wife are sent out of the city. So the conservative interpretation that you've heard of that, like, what were you taught, Harris, about Sodom and Gomorrah?
I think that's where people tend to pin their homophobia for me.
Yeah.
But it was explained to me since. I used to go to church growing up. It was Church of England, and one of the readers there she was a retired nun, and I saw her on the bus actually earlier this year, and we had a chat. I don't think she remembered me, but she had a big impact on me growing up, because she really introduced to me, as well as my parents actually, this idea that the way that you interpret things, especially from our kind of very English and literal way of speaking, is not necessarily what was originally meant, or the way that it's been translated is biased. So she explained to me at a young age, she said that actually the words originally, and she'd spent much of her life studying this, she said the words originally was not against gay men, it was against the slave trade of sex slave trade of young boys. That's what she told me.
Yeah, that's true. It's that in later, like, when we talk about like words that are later interpreted in the, or written in a lot of our English translations as as homosexuals, yeah, it's really about pedestry, like the conquering of young men as, like, or really boys, like very young boys as sex objects, or as tokens of war or conquest. But anyway, and so, it's like non-consensual sex and assault of minors is certainly a major sin, right? But consensual sex between, adults, that's, loving and free and all these sorts of things, like, is a not what that situation is talking about. So anyway, so she's right. So, but backing up into Sodom and Gomorrah. So yeah, I was taught that you're right. This is like where a lot of people start their homosexuality, like their hatred of homosexuality. But it's not about homosexuality at all. Like, but if you don't listen to a bunch of American televangelists talk about it, or like, conservative, Bible radio, like, I don't know if you all have like televangelists and like like kind of really conservative Christian radio, like on, when you turn on the radio there, but we have many stations of it. I've got 3 or 4 different ones here. But anyway, all across the dial. So you hear them constantly as you scan through. But anyway, those sort of folks will say, that these men, wanted the angels so that they could rape them. Like, no, friend, like, that's not in the text at all. The bigger sin, like what actually is happening is that they're strangers and they want them out. Like, they're refusing to give hospitality to the stranger. And like, what's really interesting in that is that, like, we're still dealing with this problem, right? Like, so many folks, like the same folks who are yelling that like homosexuality is wrong because of this text are still throwing out their gay kids and their trans kids, right? They're dead naming their trans kids. You know, I have a community member, one of my folks, they're non-binary, trans mask person, young adult, and they came to me, and after a visit at home, they're a human who is on full disability for reasons, right? Has been most of their life, but they had to go, don't have connection with the parents, but had to go home for a couple days for reasons, right? Had to go see their mom. And um the first thing that mom says when they come into the house, to them, is that they called them by their dead name and said, I can't wait until the day that you die, because I will bury you under your dead name, the girl name, right? I will bury you under this name. And I will put you in that dress that I love, that they of course don't wear dresses anymore, bury you in a dress. And, they mentioned the name of their church of origin, and said, you will be part of this, like, in so and such preacher that's known homophobic, like, that this preacher will say that all people like you are in hell. And I can't wait for that particular day, because that will be the best result of your life. Like, that's the shit that comes from that interpretation of Sodom and Gomorrah being about homophobia, when in fact, like, those exact same people aren't welcoming the stranger that is in their own home, like the outsider in their own families, and they're not, much less, like, those same folks are advocating for, Mexico to build a wall, like, I just, all that kind of nonsense. And, trying to make it difficult to, like, provide resources to immigrants in our own cities and refugees, constantly cutting social services in favor of the police and in favor of funding, INS, like immigration services that gets, that, like, the immigration police and all that get deports people, and on and on. So anyway, so it's incredibly dangerous, right, to have that particular interpretation. But so the reason, so my community chose to want to reclaim that story, right? So Sodom and Gomorrah is used against us as queer people, and I'm using queer in the largest, kind of umbrella sense, right? But so we wanted to kind of, but the using it as something against homosexuality is, as I've been saying, is a wrong interpretation. So we wanted to kind of reclaim that. But we weren't going to be the church of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's a little too much, right? So, what happens after, like, so the men come to try to, chase out these strangers, and the strangers end up leaving. I think they make it through the night. I'm not sure, but anyway, whatever the case is, they become less important. Lot, but they report back to God. God says, well, there is all this wretchedness. I'm going to destroy these cities. Now, and that's a pretty shitty God, right? We can talk about that too, but nonetheless, God's going to destroy these two cities because they can't get their act together. They can't act in a decent manner. And even though they've been given every chance in the world, the only people that are righteous are Lot and Lot's family, right? And so Lot and his wife, who doesn't have a name, right, are sent out by God out of the city, right? So, like, the imagery is like that these fireballs are, you can't see my hand, but like these fireballs are, forming above, the little twin cities and their walls. And so, like, Lot and his wife are walking out into the desert. There's supposed to be a place farther out that they haven't seen yet, that's supposed to be a refuge for them, but really they're leaving, like, everything they've ever known, right? God has condemned all of this as so wretched that it no longer gets to exist. Anyway, and so Lot and his wife are walking out, and they have some, like, the daughters come with them, and like some other associated things, like a mule or something too. But anyway, and Lot's wife turns around, like the fireballs are forming. They've been told to walk and, and don't go back. But she turns around and is turned into a pillar of salt. Again, I don't believe that this is in any way literal, but this is how the narrative of the story goes, right? And so the question is, like, why is she turned into pillar of salt? They're righteous. Like, why does she not continue? I was taught with that in the conservative world that I had come from, that she was disobedient to her husband. Well, it doesn't tell her anything, but whatever. She was disobedient to her husband and therefore to God, right? And if she was a better wife, she would have listened and she would not have died. That's some bullshit interpretation and is missing really the beauty in the story. Some people will say that she, like, wanted her, like, the other conservative interpretation that is common when I talk to people, is that people have been taught that, like, she, like all women, has a shopping addiction, and she was really sad about leaving about all of her nice clothes at her house.
What?
Yeah. So again, women don't have a shopping addiction. If we want to talk to women about shopping addictions, that's because we're trying to not talk about things like liberation and justice, right? And we want to not talk about the destruction of capitalism. So we want to just tell women to shop less and listen, and obey your husbands more and stay at home more. Because if, you go out into the town square, you go out into public, you work, you might have opinions. You might want to, like, fight for your rights. We don't want that to happen. So anyway, okay. So again, so we're just going to get women all obsessed with that. Everyone has a shopping addiction and I just don't want to be materialistic, even though capitalism teaches you to be materialistic. And okay. Anyway, so it's some dumb nonsense to avoid the topic at hand, which is justice and liberation. So really what I think happens is, so she's turned into this pillar of salt. So the way that this story is, they're literally leaving everything they've ever known, right? They're trusting God that there is a place of nourishment, that they're not just going to die in this desert, that they're heading to somewhere, but they don't know where that is. They, for all intents and purposes, they think they're the only people that survive. They may be the only people really around anymore. They're restarting the world. And, like, for her to turn around, I think that she is invested in this Old Testament way of being in community, right? Like her Old Testament truth telling. Like, there's this, idea that these prophets, right? Like, return again and again and again to these cities, right? And they take on sackcloth and ashes. And so for me, like, it seems like she turns around, maybe an attempt to do that, right? That she's taken up the mantle. Like, it's a little late to have taken up this mantle, but she takes up the mantle to try to, rescue, right? Or perhaps she knows that she turns around because she's sad about leaving behind everyone she's ever loved. And perhaps she turns around because she goes to do the only thing any of us can do in times of grief, right? Like, when there's a really terrible diagnosis, right? Like, somebody has some terminal cancer, right? Something really bad is happening. There isn't a whole lot that you and I can do. I can't fix that cancer, right? But what I can do for you is to be with you, right? Is to bear witness, right? And to, and to reflect back your life to you. And so perhaps what she does is, she can't stop the fireballs coming, she can't stop the destruction, but she does, out of all of the compassion within her, she turns around and to bear witness with compassion and mercy, right? And when she does that, she's turned in this pillar of salt, and salt is a valuable resource in the middle of a desert. So it's not that she's disappeared, she's not in trouble, she's a memorial, right? She does the right thing in turning around. And even though she can't stop the destruction that came.
Yeah, I think I've heard an interpretation of that part where she turns into a pillar of salt, that it was literally that because of the blast and because of the destruction, that that there was some kind of fallout or after effect, and because she was slightly behind the others somehow, because she was kind of lagging or something, that she got caught in some kind of blast and that she physically disintegrated. So I wonder if, yeah, there was like a little bit of her kind of falling behind, like she is not 100% sort of in it just for herself. She feels sad, and or, you know, and she just is kind of can't keep her eyes off of it because she's, you know, like you said, like very emotional. And then, like, supposedly whatever destruction has happened, she gets caught in a wave of, you know, something, and she like evaporates or melts or something like that. But yeah, it's really interesting hearing you say that and talk about this story, when in my mind for a long time that has always been used to shame me and my community, even though I never believed that that was the real intention of the story anyway. Um, it's really nice. It's really nice to hear you say that. So, in your journey from becoming, from kind of being a congregation member right up to being a chaplain, was there ever a time that you felt like, you know, religion wasn't for you? Or do you feel like the whole time you were certain in your path and it was just up to you to really claim it for yourself?
So to give you my story in brief, I came from I was raised Roman Catholic, by my parents are from St. Louis, Missouri, and we are a very, very Catholic city. I never lived here until an adult, and it sort of just happens to be where there was a job a while ago, and so I moved here, but I never intended on being here, right? But I'm glad I'm here now. My mom's family is so Catholic, so my mom's name is Yvonne, and her siblings' names are Michelle, Adrian, Renee, and Yvonne. So if you their first letters of their first name spell out Mary, because 1960s Catholics, right? So that's very, like, they're very, very. I was raised very Catholic, but my parents, I think, raised us that way, myself, my brother, out of just obligation. I don't think that they really believed. I, though, did. When I was young, I had like a sense of the divine, right? I knew, like, I loved being in like kids choir and like singing, like standing in the balcony, and like, the hymns like rising into the rafters and reverberating. Like, it just was this sense of transcendence for me. And I just remember having a connection to the divine, and that there was got to be something bigger that was guiding us, and even knowing small, like, that there was just ugliness in the world, right? Like, and that, like, there had to be another alternative to just continuously living in the nonsense
Mm,
and the shit. And so but so when I was small, I was an altar server. And so, like, I was helping, like, the priest has little kids like go and like set up the different communion elements and stuff in the Catholic Church, and it's very formalized. I fell carrying a candle, and because I'm 5'11" now, but I hit an early growth spurt, so I was like 5'6" or 5'7", like in second grade. I mean, I was like head and a half taller than everyone else by at least. I had like super, super early puberty. And so anyway, so I was so tall, and I had these big shoes and these giant glasses. I was just klutzy, right? And I was carrying this candle. No one ever should have put a candle in my hand. And I fell. And instead of having compassion, like, into sort of the priest, like, everyone gasped. The priest turned around. He had me immediately sit down. I didn't get to help with the rest of the service, which was like a disgrace, right? And then at the end of it, he asked us not to come back. And so my family never went back to Catholic church. Now, I know as a pastor, like, having done all of this training, right, that, like, probably what he meant was, well, this is not a great role for you, and let's find you something else. But that's literally not what he said, right? For all intents and purposes, my family was kicked out of the Catholic Church, and it was my fault. And so so my family fled. I continued to really believe in a divine, but I was angry, like, why on earth am I this big gangly human, and like, why did you cause this, God? The My mom started getting into reincarnation stuff. It was just in, but so I later took classes in the Hindu traditions. She was really on a lot of drugs, to be honest. She didn't, there's legitimate beautiful ways to believe in reincarnation. The way that you get there is that if you you can get there pretty easily by believing that talking having an understanding of time being in cycles and all these things. There's a couple of things that are a little bit different from the Western understanding that I had grown up with, but you just make these couple of different jumps, and oh sure, there's this is how you end up believing in reincarnation like a billion Hindus do, and that's beautiful and wonderful and great. That was not what my mom believed. So anyway, she just did a lot of drugs and watched too much Oprah. So anyway, but nonetheless, so they really weren't religious. My growing up was pretty chaotic, and so I joined a church in middle school, like an conservative evangelical church. And because I wanted the stability and I wanted reasons to get out of my house, right? And so kind of fast forwarding, in college, I joined a very conservative church. And that was really a cult. They were young earth creationists. They were very strong on gender roles. If your audience doesn't know what young earth creationism is, they might not. Young earth creationism believes that the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old. So they're super skeptical of science in general, but definitely in evolution. It's a hot mess. But anyway, the organization that runs most of that here is Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis. They can go look it up, but it's a whole mess. It'll just make you upset. But anyway, and it's super anti-science. They're anti-vaccine. But anyway, and super gender roles, there's particular roles for women. The reason that church had felt really appealing is, again, the life I had come from was really chaotic. And they made promises that you, as a woman, if I went to Bible study and I did church 7 days a week and I was faithful and I this and that, I would get married at the end. The promise was that I would get married at the end of college and my life would be good. We would have this good job and we'd have this good house. And I believed it. And I did. I got married out of school, and I knew that I was LGBTQ. But that was so shunned, and it had been shunned by my parents, it's shunned from the school that I had come from. Of course, it's shunned in the church culture, that I just kept pushing down the queerness, right? So I married this man that I loved. And it was hard. And he had major mental health problems. He died by suicide. When I was 24, almost 25. Yeah, 24 and a half or so. And then when he died, I was shunned by the church, right? They had no concept. Their pastors didn't go to school. To allow them access to people like they had and have is really dangerous. He had been abusive, physically and emotionally abusive. And after a particular incident, I finally got up the nerve to report. Again, I didn't know, I didn't know that there were domestic violence hotlines, right? I just didn't know. I didn't know that I had options. I would behave so much differently now, right? But then I'm in this super closed, tiny little system, So I finally steeled up myself. The only thing that I knew to do, which was to go to my pastor's wife, right? And to say, he did this and this and this, and I'm scared. I'm scared about going home. I'm scared. like, I'm not safe, we're trying to have a baby, and the baby, if I'm not safe as a pregnant person in this house, like, and they told me to, instead of like dealing with the abuse, like getting me out and getting him help, right? Um, they told me that, the winsome wives win back their wayward husbands to the Lord, and you do that by dressing sexier. So I was supposed to cook in the kitchen in lingerie. So I did for weeks. And that of course doesn't solve the abuse, right? Um, and so when he eventually took his own life because his mental illness was just out of control, and he hadn't gotten any help, the church didn't believe in healthcare. I mean, I don't know that would have saved him or not, but you know, it would have given him a fighting chance, right?
Yeah.
Um, and would have given me a different life back then. But, um, you know, uh, suicide is complicated for lots of, there's a lot of factors in that. But in any event, whenever when he died, the church blame me, like as if I should have, like I just wasn't sexy enough to keep him alive, like which is just
Wow.
the most ridiculous thing. And like, because there was no place for me as a young widow, right? I wasn't a virgin anymore. I wasn't, I knew too much. I was a wife, but I didn't have a husband. Woo! Like, I know how the world works a little better, like it just, anyway. And when the church abandoned me, it really felt like they really did shun me. And it was my whole world and my whole community. And when they did that, I felt like I wondered where God was, right? I wondered, like, had God left me? Like, like, what had I done to deserve this life? If God had planned every day of my life, like, why this? And I mean, and I think that then, like, my own specific experience is a little different than lots of folks, but many folks, like, you're a trauma survivor, right? Like, your specific experiences are not this. Your specific experiences are their own brand of different and terrible, right? But
Mm.
like, the thing I think that is shared amongst us is like the feeling of like, why did this happen to me? And like, and that shared feeling of aloneness. And I think, kind of fast forwarding a bit, I ended up doing a lot of self work and like trying to, and like, I think for me, what ended up changing, was that I had to reconfigure what I believed God to be, right? And I think I had been taught that God was this man in the sky who counted every hair on my head. And that's some bullshit. Like, because if that's the truth, right, then God foreordained me to suffer, to be abused. Like, God foreordained this man who would really suffer most of his life and then die, right? Like God would have foreordained, like, his mother's a mess, but like, like, could you, like, I couldn't imagine a God, like, he was a very wanted baby, right? Like, I couldn't imagine a God who, like, creates a baby, like, people like cradling this very young baby, like, knowing that this child is going to suffer and harm people like this, or like, or be, like, I just, like, that God is evil, right? Because if that's how God is going to create, then God shouldn't have made. I like that. And I just don't think, like, in all these other studies, like, that's not the God of the scriptures. And that certainly isn't the God of liberation and justice, right? Like, I think that I did a lot of theological study. I did a lot of reworking things. And I think I believe in a God, but I believe in a God, not of a man in the sky, but I believe in a God who dances in and among us in connection, right? That like, that there's something really holy. Like when you and I had a conversation before this, and like, there's something really beautiful in like sharing our shared experiences, right? And like finding common ground and in creating community. And like there's, because in what's that shared space, right? Like there's something new that didn't exist before we had this sort of conversation, right? And that new thing it has its own little life, right? And that life like joins in all of these other new possibilities and all these things. And so you could call that like, connection, but you could also name that as divinity, right? And so I experience God in community and connection, and that those community and connections at their best drive us toward liberation. And so yes, I felt very alone. To answer, that's a long answer to your short question.
Yeah.
But like, yes, I felt very alone, but also like, I think it took not only the church leaving me, but me leaving the God of that church, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you feel about religion? I mean, would you describe yourself as religious now, or do you think? And because I think the thing for me is that I think because of coming from such in many different arenas, such a patriarchal, systematic, kind of in many ways soulless upbringing, I can't help personally but see religion as a system that is ultimately designed for the system's benefit and not for the individuals. Now, of course, I 100% support people who are religious and have their religious beliefs, and I don't think that what they're doing is wrong. It's just how I know that I feel personally about the whole thing. And I know that that's just me, and that's not everybody's truth, and it doesn't have to be, and there's still value in everyone's life and potentially what they're here on the earth to do. But was there ever a point for you when you felt that way about religion, or did you see it as not religion's fault at all, but rather the people who've kind of corrupted it?
I think so. So your two questions are, do I consider myself religious, and is the issue with people or religion as a concept itself? So to answer the first one, or to answer the question of whether I am religious or not, I consider myself deeply religious and deeply, deeply faithful, right?
Yeah.
And I am very quick to claim my place at the table with the clergy and and sort of push my way into getting into every kind of space like that I can.
Yeah.
Because as a trans person, as a visibly queer person, as a, female bodied person, right? I'm AFAB, assigned female at birth. Like like, I visibly still have breasts, like most of the time. Like I just, I like all of these things. I think it's really important to be able to say like, no, like trans people belong at this table, right?
Yeah.
But, survivors of, like I'm quick to tell my story, and also to say like survivors belong at this table, queer people belong at this table, like young people belong at this table, though I'm, every day increasingly less young, right? But like, but like, people who like function in this way, like we belong here, and we are, like God doesn't belong to the homophobes, right? Like, God, the gospel, right? The God's call to go and do the good work of liberation and justice in the name of God. Like like that call, like comes, it like that belongs to us. And so like, so I am very quick to say I am not religious, because for me, right, I'm making a different decision than you are on this, but for me, I refuse, in my position, I refuse to concede Christianity to the homophobes, right?
Sure. Yeah, I
Like,
get that.
now, and I 100% respect you and most of my community members who are like, fuck no, I don't want anything to do with that project. Like, fuck no, fuck no. And like 100%, like I 100% am on board with, like, when people say that doesn't work for me, and I say, great, what works for you, right?
Yeah.
And so like, but and two, like, I think that, like I mentioned, I've got a ton of my folks are pagan-y, witchy folks, right?
Yeah.
I think that, like, there's this really beautiful thing that some of them are up to, like they're creating like an all trans coven that's happening, and like, cool, like really cool, like do that thing, right? Like, because you are creating religious community and you are claiming a place in so like when people say, are you religious, all these folks are yes, right? Like they're reclaiming their place in a larger tradition. And like, so goodness gracious, if that works for you, like more power to you. Can I help you find a crystal, right? Like, what do
Yeah.
you need? Like, how can I support you in that, right? I am not pagan-y, like, but like, goodness gracious, I'm so glad that works for some of you. And like, we have one of my community members is like follows the Order of Odin, and apparently like the Proud Boys like to claim that too, but they're in a intentional anti-racist like order of Odin. Anyway, and so we had this like 2-hour conversation the other day that was all about like how this works for them, and it's beautiful. And like the tenets of that are all about serving people and caring for folks through, and their myth making like story, or their truth telling story isn't Jesus, right? It's Valhalla and the heraldic tales of Odin. Great, perfect. Like this, like following that path for them helps them to like gives their life direction, and helps them to be like doing the cool justice work, because they're helping doing this like free, they're running this like turkey takeover thing and providing like donated turkey meal, like real chef made Thanksgivings to all kinds of our community members.
Mhm.
Like, and that allows them, like they like some of their reason for doing that is because they are being faithful practitioners of this other tradition.
Yeah.
So I think for that, like, I believe that there's a power in religion, and there's a power in reclaiming especially Christianity for us as trans people. And
Yeah.
yes, please don't do that if that isn't healthy or good for you, right? I certainly, and I should probably say directly, like, I support people. I do a lot of interfaith work and no faith work, right? But I am certainly not someone who believes that the gospel call is to make more Christians. Like, I don't want you to believe what I believe. This works for me, but I don't know that it would work for you. Like, I don't, I don't. Our bigger imperative is to care for each other. I think there's many paths to God, right?
Yes.
And as
Yeah,
far
and
as, oh yeah, sorry
that's a key belief of mine, is that all paths lead to God. And I really feel, and I've said this before, I really feel that if you really are connected to the divine and you're aware of that, then you really should be seeing the divine in pretty much every person that you meet, even if
right,
they're misguided or whatever. Um, and I think that if you get to the point where you start only seeing divinity potentially within the fellow members of your congregation, then actually you're not connected, I don't think, or not fully, because as far as those kinds of beliefs and religions and traditions go, we were all created equally. And so if we're not seeing that, then we're biased. And I think that's potentially, you could say, it was an insult to God as well.
yeah, I think that's true. Like, I think that God is big enough to handle the many ways that God has created us, right? Like, and um for me, kind of answering the second part of your question, for me, I follow the path of Jesus because I see, for me, the best path toward a model of liberation in the story of Jesus. I think a lot about like the example of Jesus serving the marginalized, right? Like Jesus hung out with like the people that, you know, were outcast by their own society and by their own families, and with the poor and the sick. You know, it seems really clear to me that if Jesus were hanging around now, like Jesus would hang out, you know, in the middle of the trans community, in the, you know, Jesus, we like, you know, would hang out, you know, with the leather folks, like one of our orgs, not mine, but another of our great orgs runs like MOHO, the like a Missouri sex workers coalition group. Jesus would go and hang with those folks. Like those are Jesus's people too, right? And like, you know, it Jesus, like anytime that people draw a line between us and them, like Jesus is with the them, right? And so I think, so there's that example of like, you know, following the path of Jesus means that like you're providing a special care and giving a special voice, or creating space for people themselves to give the, you know, to speak with their own voice for the concerns of the most marginalized and oppressed. But also in the story, like when you talk about the way that Jesus interacted in larger society, so not like with individual people, but like with the government, right? Jesus is political radical, right? Who's killed because he's advocating for like, you know, the rights and needs of marginalized and oppressed people, right? He's jumping around saying, you know, like Caesar isn't it, right? There's a God who's bigger than Caesar, right? And boy, that feels really contemporaneous when we feel like we're kind of saying the same thing about, you know, our current president, right? You know, and like there's a God that's bigger than Donald Trump and Trump's nonsense, right? But sometimes it's kind of hard to feel that around here. Anyway, so but like, so Jesus uses the master's tools to disrupt the master. So like Jesus has these community organizing strategies, right, built into it. So like one of the things is like, you know, if like there's the turn the other cheek thing, right? I was taught that this is like this passive thing, like, oh, Christians aren't supposed to get into a fight and like blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what that's about at all, right? Like what it is that like you were allowed to slap someone of a lower status than you, like across the face. Like, so if you take your right hand and you are allowed to slap them like across using the front of your hand, right? You couldn't backhand people, but if you turn your cheek, so if you turn kind of presenting to them your opposite cheek, the only way that you can really, they can hit you is to backhand you, and that then gets them in trouble, right? So like your authority is breaking their own, you know, you're using the like your authority, the authority system against them. The same thing is like, you know, instead of carrying, like a soldier could make you carry the cross, like, you know, like literally like pick up that cross kind of stuff. Like a Roman soldier could make you carry something for them. It was like they like 1 mile. They didn't use miles, of course, but I forget exactly what the measure was. But there was some 1 mile, right? But instead of like 1 mile, like Jesus's command was no. Instead of 1 mile, carry it 2, right? Because that got them in trouble. Like not only did it embarrass them, but actually it could get them in trouble with their superiors. So it's literally using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, right? And so in those sort of things, like I think that there's this really interesting example in Jesus, like to talk about like within like we can use Christianity to dismantle like the worst bits of Christianity, you know, of Christian culture, right? And we can use like Christianity that's such like this tool of capitalism, because so much of like of contemporary Christianity is at least in the context that I'm in, so much of contemporary Christianity is like that confuses Jesus and capitalism, right? And so like, so you can use like the tools of Jesus to dismantle capitalism and like create a system of mutuality, and doing all of that kind of work in a language that is familiar to a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for those kind of reasons, like I am a Christian. I also identify as a Unitarian Universalist. I just trained Unitarian Universalist too, but but really, like when we have these sort of conversations, I will jump up and down and claim my place as a Christian,
Yeah.
because of all of those sort of reasons, you know. And again, I don't think that solution is for everyone. I certainly am not going to push people, you know, who are like, Christianity really hurt me. Cool. You don't want it. I don't want to talk, you know, like,
Yeah.
I like that's real, you know.
Mm. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So, Tori, you and I met because you conducted, was it one or several of a mass wedding?
Yeah, so we did mass weddings in front of City Hall, um, for the Supreme Court of the United States recently chose to nominate a incredibly conservative judge named Amy Coney Barrett. She is anti-immigrant, anti-reproductive rights, anti-science, and anti-LGBTQ rights. She really wants to push back, and has made it very clear that she really wants to push back LGBTQ rights, including the rights to adoption where they exist, and equal marriage, which is wild, right? And I was so upset about her nomination, and she of course got nominated. There was really no protest anywhere. Like the little marriage protest that we, you know, holding queer marriages in public, was our protest of her. We were about the only protest in the whole country, so we got a ton of national press, which is great. But also, like, if our senators had done anything, they wouldn't have covered our weddings, you know? Like, I wish that they had done something to fight it so that we weren't the only protest in the country, you know? But they failed at their job. So, but yeah, so we married over 4 days. I had dozens and dozens and dozens of volunteers and volunteer clergy and photographers and bakers and witnesses and all kinds of things. You know, we had the whole place was festooned. The whole front of City Hall was festooned with rainbows. And we ended up marrying 14 couples, and we did 2 vow renewals, which was really, really cool.
Cool. I love that. When you're doing that sort of thing, do you ever have this moment where you're like, wow, this is really kind of history in the making and I'm in it?
No, it felt like that when reporters and folks asked me about it, but no, I am in the moment. It's just what I wanted in the moment, um was 2 things. Like it was acts of joyous resistance, right? That like that you know, protest is incredibly important to securing our rights, has been part of the queer story, and that this is not just like we're just gonna have weddings, it's fun, yay, wedding. Like no, like this is intentionally an act of protest. And sometimes, a lot of times, we march, we shut shit down, like we sit in, you know, we sit on the highway, etc. But like right now, the way that we can protest her effectively is by doing the thing she wouldn't want us to do, right? Which is marrying queer people. But also, like, what I really thought about in that moment was that, like, you know, I'm in America, like our COVID numbers are exploding. We knew that they were going to explode over the winter. It's currently worse than we thought it was going to be, but you know, like but our numbers were, you know, a little bit lesser then, so it was still safe-ish to gather. You know, people were masked and distance and all that, but we were still able to gather like that, outside carefully. But we, you know, doing those weddings for 4 days, I stored up so much joy in my heart that's going to help me get through the long, dark, and isolated winter. And I hope that also, like, storing up that level of like queer and trans joy will also help my people get through, you know, like, we did this beautiful thing. We will get through this winter together, even though it's going to be really hard. And even though we're only together virtually, you know, and at the, someday there'll be a vaccine and we'll be able to, be together again. So.
Yeah, definitely. So moving forward, Tori, what are your kind of goals for the future, or what is it that you want to kind of grow and cultivate during your kind of profession and passion?
So, well, the next event that we're doing Adopt a Queer. So we have sign up going on right now. By the time this podcast goes up, I think it'll be in full swing. But basically, like, having LGBTQ adults sign up, and like supporters sign up, and kind of matching them, and then like people sending people like their folks like holiday, like their assigned queer person, like holiday cheer for between Thanksgiving and, which is like at the end of November, and all the way through Valentine's Day. I had people pick their, select their holidays. So some of my, putting people who celebrate Hanukkah with someone else who celebrates Hanukkah,
Cool.
putting our Yule supporters not with conservative Christians, like these kinds of things. So trying to match people to the best that we can. But so I think that, like, because that's another way to create community. I think for me professionally, I work full time, but I am struggling financially. Like, I do this full time, but I raise my own support, and it's really hard. I think that my, like, most immediate goal is figuring out how to, get the other funding. I'm about 40% funded, and that's not enough to pay my bills. And so so figuring out the funding is a big one, but also, like, assuming that funding gets figured out, like, I want to be in connection with more folks, right? Like, I think I want to be training more people to literally do this, like, come on and do this ministry with me. I think we need about 10 of me in the city. And because, like, we do a ton of, like, just one-on-one pastoral care, emotional, spiritual support, funerals and weddings, and walking beside people. And I do classes on mental health stuff in the kink community. And I've done, like, church work around inclusion. I mean, just on and on and on, and tons of activism. And, like, there really is a need for about 10 of literally me in the city, and outside of it, like, hundreds and thousands of us, right? And so I would like to be training some more folks to be doing this work, to join me in doing this here in the city, and then on. I think, building greater community, and taking on more, collaborative projects that help our trans community in the future. We're talking about, there's discussions around, like, housing complexes for trans folks, and some longer term mutual aid, and, like, we have, like, a doctor in town that is really trans affirming, like, consistently, and we need a bunch more, like, so just trying to help with efforts like that help our community. But it's really hard to know, right? It's hard to know, like, 6 months from now, or, like, even, like, someday when we live in a post-vaccine world, right? Like, what on earth it'll look like, because the community changes so much, and we're intentionally adaptable and flexible. But 5 years from now, I want to be doing exactly the work I'm doing now, only adapted to that context.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you for that, Tori. And if people want to follow you, what platforms are you on, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so the best way to find me, so I'm Tori Jameson, ToriJameson. You can friend request me directly, or my ministry page is really updated all the time, so you can follow our ministry and what we're up to at Lot's Wife, LOT''S wife, trans and queer chaplaincy. I think we're, like, facebook.com/Lot's Wife Chaplaincy. And then I right now am raising most of my support on Patreon. And so, and you can follow me there. So Lot's Wife Chaplaincy.
That's cool. Yeah, check the show notes, and we'll stick the links directly in there.
Yeah.
And so you can follow and support Tori if you're called to do so. Tori, thank you so much. This has been
Hey,
so fascinating and lovely to hear your story and your words.
thank you so much for having me. It's really beautiful to get to talk to folks. And like, I listened to a couple of your other episodes and, was just blown away with the level of discussion and like the levels of discussion about spirituality. So I'm really thankful for you and Jordan, right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
listened to you and Jordan earlier, and like, our community is so beautiful in the ways that we have learned to support each other, and I'm honored to be a part of that. So
Oh, Tori, that's so lovely. Thank you so much.
yeah, so nice to talk to you.
And you.
Hey, and thanks for joining us on this episode with Tori Jameson. Just a little note that Tori is completely self-funded and is not paid by a church or anything. So if you would like to support Tori, I really encourage you to. I will link their fundraising link in the show notes. So go and have a look at that. And please sponsor Tori. I think the work that they're doing is amazing, and long may it continue. If you haven't already, you can sign up to our mailing list at muxharrishill.com/transection. You just put your name and your email address in there, and we'll email you each time there's a release or we're doing something. We'll tell you about it. It's not too many, so I promise you won't get bogged down. We're not trying to sell you anything. We'll just send you a little email when an episode is released, and any other bits in there. It's sort of like a little newsletter. So go and sign up there. And if there's anyone that you think would benefit from listening to the Transection podcast or any particular episodes, please do share it with your friends. And if you wouldn't mind, you could also leave us a review on Facebook, the Transection podcast. We love to hear from you, and we love the feedback that we're getting. And it's always lovely to connect with people that have been listening. And yeah, we want to know that we're making a difference from as many of you as possible. So yeah, anyway, take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next episode where we're talking to Maxwell Hope, who is, okay, let me get this right, they are a trans vocal, oh no, hang on a minute, I can't remember the proper term. They study voice anyway, and it's really fascinating to get into the technical bits that we need to know, especially in the trans community. There are some people who have dysphoria with their voice. I'm one of those people, and Max studies how we speak and how we make the sounds and how we can change those things if we're looking to really start to hear a voice that sounds right to us. So I found the whole conversation really fascinating. So yeah, come and join us for that. Anyway, in the meantime, take care, and we will be back with another episode in a week. Bye.